So this is a study that explores how personality and gender can influence conflict in adolescence. So the main research questions they were trying to understand were how personality traits and conflict management styles are related in adolescence specifically, and what the role of gender is in that relationship. So the authors conducted a study with 124 participants. They didn't go in depth about the demographics, but it's obviously inferred that they were all under the age of 18 and had a variety of male and female, etc. So the participants were asked to complete a 5-factor CP5F personality questionnaire and a questionnaire related to how they handle conflict. So they kind of mixed, they said 3 different previous questionnaires together on these ideas. And then they asked questions to deduce how the participants personally respond to conflict, specifically things like whether they withdraw, do they focus on reconciliation, are they moved to kindness, are they confrontational? So they had a lot of questions based on those areas. And then they evaluated the data statistically through various means, including the statistical package for the social sciences, looking for that relationship between personality traits, gender, and conflict responses in adolescence. So the results showed that gender and personality do tend to have a rather large impact on how one addresses conflict as an adolescent, and it can be inferred that that would translate to your adult years. They found many differences between girls and boys in their overall values and responses to conflict, and found links between personality traits to emotional stability and how that can influence conflict management. And they determined that while part of the conflict management strategies are influenced by gender, this is not inherently because of physical differences, but rather due to the reinforcement of gender stereotypes. Overall, the results were we're saying that personality has a big role, gender can influence the personality, but they also talk about environmental factors and how those things can play a role in all of that as well. For instance, about like the gender stereotypes, if you have somebody, like let's take a boy who's being told, to like tough it up and things like that, he may broach more of like a confrontation style in management. And they talk about the different issues that the more negative ways to handle conflict can affect the adolescents. And overall, coaching clients on how to understand their own approaches to conflict and the factors that influence them and help them grow in this area can be a great tool to build resilience and increase better conflict management strategies. So obviously, if things were taken from when you're an adolescent and into adult years, better understanding yourself and why you are that way can help you personally, and also in a workplace, for instance, help those around you in reducing or preventing conflict.
Did they link any certain types of, did they identify personality types and link them to certain conflict management styles?
So not technically. The CP5F personality questionnaire, it's looking at 5 factors of personality. So they actually talk about how personality can't be defined depending on who you ask, right? Because some psychologists say yes, and some say that there's all these various factors that influence it. So they didn't necessarily give a specific personality type. They kind of weighed all of these individual factors together to evaluate it. So the conclusion part of the paper, they kind of really narrow that down to if your personality leans this way, this might be how you handle it, and these are potential consequences. And they do that for virtually every area that they kind of looked at. So they talk about withdrawal, confrontation, dominance, all of those different pieces. And if your personality leans that way, you might do X, Y, or Z. But they didn't, but I suppose it wasn't necessarily a personality, it was more different traits, if that makes sense.
I think the challenging part about these personality style tests, or the personality style taxonomies, I guess, right? In general, is that they seem to often, to me, I don't know, maybe I haven't looked at all the literature in this area, but they seem to discount situational factors, and that people's personalities can shift dramatically depending on the situation and the way that they handle things and behave in certain different types of situations with different types of people and their relational dynamics. And so how my personality is and thus my conflict management style with one person in one setting could be different with that same person in another setting, or with another person in the same setting. So it's like the situational factors are important, and that's why I think sometimes it's hard for me. Like that's why I don't necessarily like measuring conflict management styles, because I think those can vary so much depending on the situation. I think the same probably is true with personalities. I mean, that's the same intuition.
Yeah, I would agree with that though. I think that's absolutely right.
Yeah, I also agree, but I think just highlighting, and this kind of part of your takeaway here, Natalie, just kind of highlighting how different factors are going to play a role in their approach, which is kind of aligns with what Jeremy's saying is, here's your, here's your main style or whatever, but like, where does that come from, and what factors contribute to changing that? I think just being aware of that first off, that's possible. And then secondly, with whomever we're coaching, who we're working with, helping them to maybe even look deeper. Like, this is kind of reminding me of the previous, our previous article and the conversation of childhood experiences, right? What are your past experiences that play a role in the way that your conflict management style now, and then present day, how does that change? I think just being aware of that is important. Not that we have to necessarily take an assessment and name your style, but being aware of different styles and what environmental factors and childhood experiences would change that.
Yeah, I think some self-awareness around like, hey, at work with this person, I tend to handle conflicts this way, and with this person, I tend to handle them this way, and at home, I tend to handle it. Like having some awareness like that probably helps break unhealthy patterns if you're noticing unhealthy patterns.
Yeah, I mean, I personally lean towards like family of origin and childhood experiences as playing a huge role in sort of your conflict management style, whether that be, you are now sort of the opposite of what you saw growing up, or you're the same. Like, I think it could be either or, maybe even both and, right? But I do think that a big part of it stems from our past experiences.
Yeah, and I think that's where sometimes I wanted to put in my 2 cents on the conflict management style and tests and stuff, because I think especially we're talking about adolescents here in this study, I can think about when I first heard of the conflict management of this with Thomas Kilmann, and I was, I think, in college, and didn't know a whole lot about myself when it came to how I deal with conflict on a general basis. And so what I found through my master's program is they teach you to understand, what, maybe where's some of your baseline, where do you often, tend to go when it comes to conflict, but then also to say, recognize this isn't your only method of dealing with it, that, and especially in, when it comes to negotiation too, that, if somebody's being really competitive to you, sometimes the best method in negotiation is to be competitive right back, because that's the only thing that they're going to respond to. So that kind of, flexibility, I think, is important. And I think you all mentioned that, but I think there's an importance, especially as an adolescent, where I didn't know anything about, how I dealt with conflict, and that helped me get a grasp of, oh, look, I tend to accommodate a lot, or I tend to avoid quite a bit. Helped me kind of re-examine when conflict came up in my life, because I saw it differently.
Yeah, and that's a cognitive exercise. It takes some awareness to kind of get yourself out of it. And because like Sarah was saying, there's a lot to do with what you learned growing up. I notice sometimes, like, the way I react to someone, I'm like, whoa, there's my mom, and then sometimes it's like, whoa, there's my dad, like, and I'll see them do the same thing, and I'll go, man, no wonder I act like that sometimes, because I see her doing it.
And I think the interesting part, though, is a lot of people probably don't take, this is just a generalization, but don't take that approach to really evaluate their how they handle conflict unless they notice like a negative pattern per se, but it's helpful just in general to understand that, right? Like it doesn't need to be that you blew up on somebody and now you're questioning it. Like I think that's a good exercise to do no matter who you are or what environment you're in, just to understand that.
Yeah, and going back to like being self-aware of it, like the first time I took that test, I was like, oh, like I am very avoiding. And I like kind of reevaluated like the relationships in my life. I was like, ooh, I don't like that. And then I sort of tried to change and I was like, ooh, I'm accommodating, but like I'm a little too much accommodating. And then like was working and like trying to change from that too. So I think just being like aware of like your patterns and like evaluating like on a personal level, like the relationships you have and what they look like is also really important too.
I wonder what percentage of people that work in the conflict resolution profession started out at least as like accommodating avoidant.
I think
I
that's
wonder
what
if
like
it's, like,
drew
large.
me into this. I was like, ew, I hate the way I am with conflict. I want to learn and like hopefully this can help my personal life too. Like that's why I got a master's for like my own self-help.
Right. Yeah. I wonder, but I wonder, I would hypothesize that it's probably a large percentage.
Yeah, I'm sure.
With that hypothesis.
Well, like we're interested in like what we can't do ourselves. I think that's just part of like human nature and like human condition.
Yeah.
Mhm. But I do want to point out that I think different conflict management styles, it's not like one is positive, one is negative. I think they all play a role in different scenarios.
Absolutely.
You know, like, and so being able to use them strategically and change your strategy and your approach, it highlights more of the positive, if you know, being able to kind of change your strategy. I don't know that. I feel like they all have a role, play a role, so in some different scenarios.
Yeah, if you can be adaptive and kind of know when to use what and strategic about it, that's probably
Yeah.